Welcome back to the OverChurched podcast for people who love Christ but struggle with Christians. I am Delicia.
I'm Justin.
Why are you saying it like that?
Because I feel a critical spirit right now trying to steal my focus, and I'm trying to rebuke it. I'm struggling.
Well, we can shift the focus to Pastor Steele, who is our guest today. Thank you so much for being
Pastor
here.
Reginal Steele.
It's an honor to be here.
Kingdom in the Valley.
That's right.
Kingdom in the Valley. Yeah.
Yep. Kingdom in the Valley Christian Church. Most people just call us Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we're known for.
And how long have you guys been?
We turned 19 back in January.
January.
Yeah.
19 years.
That's
19,
a legacy.
19 years in counting. Yep.
19 years.
That's amazing.
Well, I just want to thank you again for coming. It's been
excited.
awesome when our paths connected. I heard a lot of great things about you, and then we got to connect, and then just honestly just seeing another Black pastor leading a healthy and successful ministry was really inspiring for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to again give you your flowers. You've been 19 years leading consistently, going through. You planted, so you understand our journey, and
absolutely
to see it, that's amazing, man. So thank you for what you've done and all the lives you've impacted.
Well, I appreciate it. It hasn't been easy, but thank God, for the Holy Spirit, and just, I got a phenomenal wife. I'll be married 31 years next week.
That's beautiful.
And when I looked at my wife to start this church called Kingdom, I said, I need your whole paycheck. She was a 911. She was a 911 operator for the Phoenix Police Department.
They get paid.
Yeah, well, well, she gave me her whole check. It was a little bit over $1,300, and
oh man,
that's turned into thousands of people and millions of dollars a year.
Wow.
Zechariah 4:10 says to not despise the day of small beginnings.
Yes.
And I'll never forget. I told her, give me a year. I'm going to make you leave the police department. After 4 weeks, I made her quit. And the church just took off.
Wow.
Because I realized I couldn't be a visionary and a manager.
Yeah.
That I needed to bring somebody alongside of me to manage the vision.
Yeah.
So I can be more of the visionary, if you will. And so in a nutshell, now all 5 of my adult kids work for me.
Wow.
So that's where we are 19 years later.
That's a legacy, though. The fact that they want to be there and that they are there with you.
Yep.
And that's amazing. I know, like, talking to other pastors, that's one of the things that they're like, I want my kids to do whatever, of course, what God has called them to. But if they could be a part of this with us, that's
yeah. And I discouraged it because I believe in ministry, you got to have thick skin and a short memory.
Right.
Because you're in the people business.
Yes.
And so I told them, listen, I'm in a position financially to make you be an RN if you want to work for the police department. But I think that they saw I had such a balance.
Yeah.
Because Proverbs 11:1 talks about a false balance is an abomination to God. And I think they saw the balance that I had, that they wanted to follow in my footsteps, because I totally was like, please don't do this.
Yeah.
Because my dad did it here in Phoenix for 35 years.
Wow.
So I'm a PK. So I know all the ins and outs of ministry, and it was something I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, at 24, I accepted my calling. At 25, started preaching, and then 33, founded my own church, and the God has been good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what is something a little bit that you want the audience to know about you and that maybe most people don't know? Maybe it's like about you and your wife, or you and your kids, or anything like that.
I know something the audience needs to know before you even tell them. You're a savage, man. I remember the first time I went to your church, just a random Sunday. We had stepped down from ministry, and I go in, and I think it was your first Sunday back or something. And I watched you go in from, it was right after Chris Rock has slapped, or Will Smith has slapped Chris Rock, and you covered everything. I remember I was in there. He's like, you went from how we out here embarrassing ourselves, and like you covered that. You went. I watched you go. You hit that. You hit phone calls. You got like I was like, oh, he went there. Oh, he went there. So I feel more liberated because I'm like, no matter what I say, General Steele already, you're a savage, man. And your church, I saw your church just responded to it like that was like they were locked in. Anyway, so I just respect you. You are blunt. You are bold.
Absolutely.
You are unapologetically you.
Right.
That's just from the outside. But yeah, what else do we need to know about you?
I think a little what you said that's a lot. And then of course we're big about being transparent. I think that's been one of the reasons why our church has grown like it has over the last 19 years. We're very transparent. We've had some issues in our marriage early on, meeting in high school, and I wasn't faithful.
Same.
And so we're really big about, helping restore marriages and things of that nature.
That's amazing.
And keeping your family first, over the ministry, not allowing your ministry to become your mistress, keeping that balance and whatnot. And that's why even now, I'm hardly ever in the office. My 5 kids working there. I think right now we got 32 people on payroll.
Wow.
So I'm like, I pay you to run it. So I've been able to step back and spend more time with my wife and 4 grandkids.
Wow.
So that's been awesome. A blessing.
And that's amazing. That's amazing. I think that's the legacy that you want to leave behind. Yep. That's the plan. Was that the plan the whole time?
It really wasn't, because again, I really didn't want my kids to do ministry because I didn't want them to get injured, if you will.
Yes.
Because again, we're in the people business, and I love people.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I've learned this in 19 years of pastoring. People will celebrate you, tolerate you, and even cremate you.
Wow.
And so,
he's rapping.
And so as a father of 32 years later, being a father, 3 things a father is supposed to do is be a protector, a provider, and be present, and I'm really big about being present. And so you want to protect your children from getting injured. But when they said that they felt the call of God to be in full-time ministry, I couldn't fight them on it.
Right.
And so with the blessing with my 5 kids is I see them show up early and leave late, which lets me know they've taken ownership when it comes to the vision. Because my youngest, when we started the church, he was in kindergarten, and my other son was in 1st grade. And now to see them at 25 and 26, hands-on and serving.
That's beautiful.
And showing up, like I said, early and leaving late. It's been a blessing to see them take ownership when it comes to the vision of the church.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. And that's so true. I think one of the things that the biggest topic we want to hear is because you are a Black man that runs a predominantly Black church here in Arizona, in the state of Arizona. So where here, there's not a lot of those and running as big as you guys are.
Right.
And so with that being said, what is some of the things that you have seen that maybe been obstacles along the way of growing that, or maybe not even obstacles, maybe just more needs that you've seen in the Valley that has actually been thriving for your church?
Well, like I stated earlier, my dad pastored here for almost 35 years. But at 27 years old, I left his church and went to a predominantly white church.
Wow.
And everybody thought I was crazy because they're like, why would he leave his dad's church? He's supposed to take it over.
Yeah.
It was always a predominantly Black church?
Yeah. My dad's church was 99%
99.
Black. Yeah. So now I step into this church that's like 95% white.
Right.
And I'll never forget when I got out of my car, I looked at my wife. And when I saw all the white people, I said, God's got to confirm this tonight. And it's not that I was a racist. I never worshiped with white people.
Right.
And it was a random Wednesday. And I said, God's got to confirm this tonight. So I walk in this white church. They're doing worship, which was already weird because Black church on Wednesday, you just get to the word and send the people home. So I'm like, they're doing worship. So that was already abnormal for me.
Yeah.
And so during worship, this white lady turned around and looked at me and she said, young man, I don't know what you're going through, but God told me to tell you that you are at the right place at the right time. And then she turned around again and put $500 in my hand. So I was like, this is God. this is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Yeah. And so I wound up staying at that church for 5 years.
You said $500?
500 reasons to stay.
I had 500 reasons to stay. And so, so I wound up going to meeting the pastor and told him who my father was. And he knew exactly who my father was. And he said, well, I feel like God sent you here, not for message, but for method.
Wow.
He said, because the Black church, you guys don't struggle with message. You struggle with methods.
Wow.
And he said, one day I'll hire you to work here full time and kind of show you what all that looks like. And then 8 months later, he hired me.
Wow.
And then I was able to be behind the scenes and learn all those methods, systems, and the structure and things like that. So after 5 years, I planted my church, but he asked me to give him 5 years because Luke 16:12 says, how can you have your own if you haven't been faithful to another man's?
Wow.
And I believe that's why God has blessed us.
Two things. That's another thing that stands out. You're a savage and your memory is crazy. Like, is it photographic?
Well, I was a quarterback in high school, so I had to remember 66 plays, which is ironic. There's 66 books in the Bible. So, and my mom would always come and take my playbook off my chest because I would fall asleep reading the playbook. Because I had to know everybody else's assignment, including mine. Yeah. And she would take it off my chest when I would be sleeping. She was like, if you can learn the Bible like you know this playbook, you'll be somebody great in God. And I used to just laugh at her. But over the years, here I am.
Every time we talk, I remember one of the first times we met, we had lunch. You're giving me the exact how many days. You were like, yeah, we were portable for
3 years, 8 months, and 2 days.
Like stuff like that. Like
that's amazing. Look at you asked me how long I've been married.
Right.
And I was like,
you were struggling.
I was like, I don't know.
See, she don't love me as much as you love. No, but and then the same thing you do with scriptures. But I want to circle back because you just said something that honestly, a lot of people get, if they hear that, they could get offended. If you were to say, Black people know how to do the message, but white people know how to do the method.
Right.
Is it fair to say there's a problem in your perspective? Would you say there's a problem with the Black church in terms of methodology, in terms of growth, in terms of effectiveness?
I would say not so back east, because they're ahead of the curve. A lot of my Black pastor friends back east and back south, they've been on the method thing for a while. But when you start coming more toward the west, and especially here in Arizona, last time I checked, we're less than 7% Black. So there's really not a whole lot of Black churches here. And the ones that are here are very small. And so that was the one thing that I was like, we will not be small, because Matthew 25:23 says, if you be faithful over a few things, He'll make you a ruler over many things. Our first year, we started with 37 people and we hit 1,100 plus people in 12 months.
Wow.
And a lot of that had to do with the systems and the methods, not just the message, but we had structure and things of that nature. And I believe that a lot of those methods that we implemented from day one helped us grow, because I believe, like they say, anything unhealthy will not grow. And so I believe part of the reason why we grew like we did is because we were healthy. But I made a decision to adopt those white methods, and I got some criticism. I had some backlash. We're starting service at 9:30 and getting out at 11, and people are like, "Oh, well, I'm used to having church for 3 hours." I'm like, "Well, we're not doing that," because my dad, bless his heart, they would go from 12 to 3:30. Then you had to be back at 7. They go to 10 o'clock. And that's probably the reason why I backslid. That's just doing too much. That's doing too much, But I think I always say, well, we don't get by revelation, we get by association. And I believe it's important to get connected to people that's got your answer and not your problem. And I'm grateful, because I didn't understand fully what God was doing when He had me leave my dad's church at 27 years old. I was in what I call what meanest this season. But when that lady said, the Lord told me to tell you, you're at the right place at the right time, and here's $500. Like you said, I have 500 reasons to just get planted there.
No, and I do want to preface the conversation with this. We've talked a little bit offline, but just to give clarity, this conversation is not designed to bash the Black church.
Not at all.
This conversation is not designed to belittle even small beginnings, like you said. I think what we've talked about, both of our hearts, is why, like you said, healthy things should grow in. And with a lot of, and we'll dive into it more, but just statistically, there's reasons to be concerned that like the future of the Black church could be non-existent if there aren't some methodical changes that are done. And when we say Black church, it almost sounds weird and until you realize that, well, the evangelical movement or the Presbyterian movement, you wouldn't call those white churches, you would just call them church until you walk in the doors and you're like, well, 99% of the people in here are white. So we just say Black church to bring a different correlation in terms of what is not the 7%, Right. So I just wanted to make sure we're clear on that, because again, this conversation is designed to bring awareness to, there's some questions I have or some perceptions I have. Maybe I'm wrong, but just going off of my experience and what I've seen, I thought it was instrumental to have someone who's been leading, who's grown up in the Black church, who's been leading a predominantly Black church, and again, I've been to your church, it's multicultural, but if we were just go off of the majority, it's to get perspective of what we're seeing and what our concerns are. So I just wanted to get that out there, because again, we're not here to bash anything as much
Right.
as to how do we build this better.
And that's good that you put that out there because, again, we don't want to seem like we're throwing anybody under the bus.
Yeah.
But I would say probably, if not every Thursday, every other Thursday when I meet with other senior pastors here locally, or there's pastors that maybe will fly in from other states. And a lot of the pastors.
Why didn't I get invited to these Illuminati meetings?
You're not there yet.
I'm not there yet. It's only 13 months. I got to get 19 years in.
No, but what I've done is I'll meet, and it's usually one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one-on-one. Like when we met one-on-one.
Yeah.
And so I meet with these guys and I share with them the different things that they need to tweak as far as, not their message, but their method.
Yeah.
And the blessing is that 100% of them are totally receptive.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then some of them said that they get some backlash because they're like, because some people don't want to adapt and adjust to change.
Yeah.
But every gentleman I've met with these 19 plus years have been very receptive.
Yeah.
When I'm said, okay, you need to tweak this. Okay, you need to start a children's ministry.
Yeah.
Right.
You need to have a follow-up ministry. You need to call your first-time visitors on Monday.
Man.
You need to have a salvation rededication class. You need to have a group for the divorce care. Where's your women's ministry? Where's your men's ministry?
Yeah.
Where's the widow's ministry?
Yeah.
And so just things of that they're just showing up on Wednesday and Sunday and just preaching. And I'll tell you this, my white pastor that I was under for 5 years, he shared this, and people can take it for whatever it's worth. He said, a white man on his best day couldn't out-preach a black man on his worst day. But he said, but when it comes to methods, we got you guys.
Yeah.
He said, when it comes to structure and systems, and he said, I believe that's why you're here is when you go start your church. He said, you'll be able to be all, 1 Corinthians 9:22 says to be all things to all people.
There goes to
save
freaking photographic memory.
I know, but no, I'm just so astonished by the fact that you were able to have this relationship with this pastor.
Those
and
are some
actually hear him. So because you're saying that was years ago that he was saying this.
Yep.
So now after 2020 has happened and everything else,
everybody's racist, everybody's sensitive.
So much sensitivity.
Sure.
I've been in rooms where it's like the leader is so scared to even, he's trying to say a roundabout way or politically correct way, and I'm losing what he's even trying to say to me or ask me as being somebody of color that is, I'm like, do you just mean like do what? Like, and when I asked that, he said, well, I'm not trying to, he's very like apprehensive of like, don't misquote me, don't take it wrong, but
don't cancel me.
But you're having these raw conversations,
Right.
and for this white pastor to just be able to blend, like, how did that get established? Like, was it just because you were open to it, or was that just like from the jump? Like,
no, not from the jump, because he was really observing me. Like the Bible says, henceforth, no one after the flesh, but after the spirit. And he really observed me for 8 months. And it's what's interesting how I got the job was I was probably there for 8 months, and he asked me to come on stage and do a testimony. And so I got this financial breakthrough, and he wanted me to share. He said, take 2 minutes and share. And so 2 minutes turns into 18 minutes because Black church, this is my time. It's sermonette time.
Yeah.
And so after church, it was a Wednesday night. He said, hey, Brother Reggie, just know at this church, 2 minutes means 2 minutes.
wow.
And so when I got home, I told my wife, I said, he's just mad because I can preach too.
Wow.
Just arrogant,
Yeah.
and then I was washing the dishes, and she said, you're wrong, honey. She said, you're not at your dad's church anymore. That's that man's blood, sweat, and tears. She said, at the end of the day, you owe him an apology. So the next morning I woke up feeling convicted. So I called my employer and said, hey, I'm going to be about an hour late. I got to take care of something. So Thursday morning, I went up to the church and asked to meet with the pastor. And the secretary was like, sure. And so when I walked in, I said, hey, I want to apologize for last night. I said, I was actually upset with you because I thought I did a great job, and the people responded, and people were standing and clapping. And but I realized that 2 minutes was 18 minutes. And I got to realize that I'm not at my dad's church anymore. And he said, you came here to tell me that? And I said, yeah. He said, well, this is what I want you to do. He said, how much money do you make at your job? And when I began to tell him, he said, well, I'm going to match the salary.
Wow.
When you go to work today, put your 2 weeks in.
Wow.
And he said, I can rock with somebody like you because you have a teachable spirit.
Wow.
And so I came on staff like 2 weeks after that.
crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Humility.
And I've learned this, and God told me when I was washing dishes that night, correction brings perfection, which we know all perfection means is maturity.
Right.
And so I'm grateful that he was man enough to confront me and say, hey, man, 2 minutes at this church means 2 minutes, not 18 minutes. And so I'm grateful. And he shared with me some other things that he probably shouldn't have shared with me. He said, when I started my church, because my church is 26% other, which is a combination, of course, of Hispanic and Caucasian and so on and so forth. And the one thing he told me was, he said, you're going to have a hard time having a multicultural church. He said, because white people tend to gravitate to people that look like them. And he even went as far as to tell me that white people have a heart condition and that they will not submit to black leadership.
Wow.
And so I said, well, I guess I'm gonna have to fight through that. And I did, because when I started my church in a swap meet in El Mirage, Arizona, people were like, well, we thought this was going to be a black church only. And I had to tell people, no, 1 Corinthians 9:22 says to be all things to all people, to save some. Even when you read Acts chapter 28, verse 30, it says Paul rented a house for 2 years. And the Bible says, and he received all. And then when you look at verse 31, and it says, and he preached the kingdom.
Yeah.
So when you're preaching the kingdom, I believe you're going to attract all ages and all races. So I'm grateful, that I was able to kind of get in the kitchen, if you will, and learn some of the, different things that go on behind the scenes and how people think and so on and so forth. And so I saw a lot. I've seen a lot in these I've been in ministry now, 27 years.
How many months, how many weeks, how many days? I'm not impressed with that. That's amazing.
That is, man, there's so many things when I think about that is like, like you said, like he went as far as saying that you're going to have a struggle with just preaching to white people. Yeah,
and Hispanics. He said Hispanics typically are loyal to each other. He said there's going to be hard for you to get Hispanics in your church. But when you come in our services 19 years later, I mean, like you said, we are predominantly black. We are 74% black. Yeah. But that other 26%, and that number is even
still
growing.
Higher.
Yeah.
If you compare that. And that's what's interesting, because it's almost sad that we have to identify a black church, you know what I mean? Just because it's predominantly. When you want, you don't go to RIP Hillsong and be like, oh, that's a white church. You're like, oh, that's just Hillsong. But 80-90% of it is Caucasian or was, you know what I mean?
Right.
When I visited, but it's not marketed as, oh, that's a white church. It's just church.
Right.
Which with a lower margin of multiculturalness than your church, but yet you could get put into the black church category when you're actually more diverse than the larger or another mega church, your size. That's crazy.
So true.
That's crazy.
I think us starting Legacy it's been the biggest thing that we have seen and heard. We weren't prepared for even the people who are leading on our teams and things of that nature, how much if they themselves are not used to a minority church
or being the minority,
how much that has brought out fleshly things of just the fact of comments said or things like one leader said like, I can't lead because I'm just a white suburban person. But yet these are black, Hispanic, and I felt so saddened in my heart that this person thought that even mattered because of the fact that these kids just loved that person. Wow. And loved this leader. But yet he didn't realize he was dealing with this fleshly likeness of it's the first time that you actually have to adapt. It's the first time that you actually have to think differently. Wow. And do differently. And yet, so the frustration and tension that I feel with Legacy is like when I hear outsiders say, we're already a black church, we're already being claimed as a black church. I don't even care if it's, but it's why do you call it that? Because he's a black pastor? Because we have
probably like 60%.
But we have music that's gospel. Okay. So at times, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, and it's not even predominantly gospel all the time, like not at all. And so it was just like, wow. And I remember having this conversation with this leader because it opened up my eyes so big was that I had told him, I said, do you know that half the time those kids actually have to adapt all the time where they're at, where they go to school, where they live. Yep.
Yep.
They are actually adapting all the time.
All the time.
So you as the leader actually get an opportunity to be able to meet them where they're at and create this safe place for them to learn about Jesus in the way that they correlate it and see others but they don't even care what your skin color is. They just want to know that you're going to give them God and that you care about them. Yeah. And so that doesn't, so it's so interesting, the conversations that we've had, and I'm no fault to any of them, like whatsoever. It just opened up my eyes of how many people actually here in the state of Arizona don't even realize when they're the minority, what brings out in their fleshliness of the things that they've never been opposed
insecurities,
to.
I think. I think a big of it is a big component of it is insecurity because they're used to, it's easy to feel secure when you see yourself everywhere. Right. You know what I mean? It's normal, it's natural, it's whatever. But when it's all of a sudden, wait a minute, then they're having to put themselves, is this coming across right? Yeah. Do they accept me? Do they like me? Am I welcome? Like, am I gonna, you know what I mean? Yeah. And they're not used to, like, that's what 90% of minorities have to feel at work, at church, if they want to, you know what I mean? Anyway. Yeah. So that has been an eye opener for us. Good.
That is so good.
It's been such an eye opener. But what you said was that even for that pastor to say that, I don't ever think it's about the color of the pastor. I think it's really about the culture of the church, of what you are trying to communicate to the demographic. If you're only going to stay gospel for all your worship, then yes, you're really saying you're leaning towards a certain demographic of people. Got it. But if you will open that up to having
all things for all
people, in your intentionality, not by the color, but by the actual cultureness of, like, we just had our first birthday. We brought out a Puerto Rican truck, a soul food truck, Southern soul food truck. That's good. I've never seen that for a church that I've worked for that's predominantly white. It's always been American hamburgers, hot dogs, whatever you name it in that way. But what we're communicating to our community is that we see you.
Right.
And
that's good.
And we see you in that way.
Love it.
So with that being said, is like, I would argue that it doesn't even have to be, if you've seen in your history and your experience, it's not about actually you as being a Black pastor. It's about your intentionality to reaching all people, meeting them where they're at. Right.
Exactly.
So how do you do that at Kingdom, or even how do you do that as just an overall pastor, Black pastor here in the state of Arizona?
And I want to add to her question, answer both of them. Do most Black pastors think the same way? Yeah. Like, how are you doing it? How do you see it? And would you say that most would you say that most Black pastors are being intentional to be all things for all people? Are they making it comfortable for their people?
Absolutely not. You know, and it's sad that I have to say no to that because most pastors, Black pastors, they rather have people in the room that look like them because now it's going to take faith to be all things to all people. I just happened to be exposed to a white church, predominantly white church, for 5 years. And then I was under a non-compete clause. So I had to wait 1 year and 3 days to start Kingdom. So guess what I did? I went to a Hispanic church.
Really?
For 1 year and 3 days. So I was with a guy named Pastor Diaz. Wow. And so I even told God, I said, Lord, what mean is this? How in the world do I go from a Black church to a white church? Now I got to go to because I wanted to start my church in 2004. But the pastor was like, well, hey, you signed a non-compete clause. He's like, you either got to wait 1 year and 3 days or be like 35 miles away. And where I was trying to go was like 22 miles. And he was like, that's not far enough. I'll get lawyers. So I got a lawyer. And my lawyer told me what I had signed 5 years prior would not hold water in court. But Proverbs 20, verse 7 says that if a man walks in integrity, his children after him will be blessed. The last thing I want to do is put my children in harm's way. So I went back to my pastor and said, hey, listen, even though my lawyers told me I could start my church in 04 January, I'm going to wait till January 2nd of 05. And I'm going to go to another church for 1 year. So I went to a Hispanic church and was able to learn their culture. So it was easy for me when I started Kingdom. I had the faith that I knew I'm like, God did not send me to a predominantly white church and a predominantly Hispanic church to look at, to have a church of people that look just like me.
Isn't your daughter-in-law Hispanic?
She's half white, half black.
Okay.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law.
She looks like
she does. She does. Yeah.
That's crazy.
But yeah. And so I had faith. A lot of my friends that I bring in to preach for me, black pastors, they'll be like, man, how in the world do you have white people and Hispanics in your church? And I had to tell them, hey, I was under a white pastor. I was under a Hispanic pastor.
Yeah. Right.
So I believe that I can make it out. And then I have to say too, when you start gravitating to the West Coast, West Coast are a little more open to being submitted to a black pastor.
Yes.
Now, when you go to Alabama, you know, you go to Mississippi, you know, the Carolinas, the Virginias, you're not going to see a lot of white people gravitating to a black pastor.
Right.
I'm not saying that it can't happen because it can.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see the masses, you know, following a African-American pastor.
True.
I want to ask you this. Okay. Going back to, so now removing kingdom, because obviously kingdom is the exception to the rule of what we're seeing. Sure. And I there's an amazing book that Tony Evans just wrote, actually. And it's called A Survey of the Black Church in America, Exploring Its History, Ministry, and Unique Strength. And he wrote this in response, not just in response, but partially in response to an article that came out in 2010 by the Huffington Post that said the Black church is dead. So this was in 2010. A Huffington Post article came out and said the Black church is dead. Wow. And it was talking about just the decline in attendance, how, you know, theologically, historically, all the things they do, like, just don't translate into, you know, into the new culture. That was what, 14 years ago. That was 2010, pre-COVID, all these things. Yeah. My question is this: how does a church, a historically black church or predominantly black church, how do they maintain, you know, true to, you know, who they are? Like, you can be all things with all people without losing who you are, right? Right, I believe that. Like Paul constantly said, I'm a Jew first. You know what I mean? So how does a African-American church not sell out, or, you know, I had a good friend, pastor tell me one time, a Indian pastor actually says, don't be the church that teaches minorities. Don't be a black pastor that teaches minorities how to do white church. Be who you are, learn, be, you know, like, but be true, like, learn, but don't lose yourself trying to be someone else because you think that'll work. And I was like, that's good. But my question is, how do you think historically black churches or predominantly black churches manage the tension of being true to themselves while also being relevant to an emerging multicultural society? I believe that you have to be ambidextrous. Obviously, I'm a black man. And I embrace my black culture and all of that. And I'm proud of who I am and whose I am. But more than the black man, I'm a kingdom man. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And again, I embrace my culture and I'm proud of my culture. I think we're awesome and all of that. I think that every culture should think that of themselves. You know, but I think that what's happened with the black church, a lot of people have not pivoted, you know, to, you know, like I mentioned earlier, structure, systems, delegating. You know, a lot of guys that are visionaries are still trying to be managers. And Samuel Chan wrote a great book about who's holding your ladder. And he says, as you're painting the picture on Sunday and Wednesday night, you got to have ladder holders. You got to have people around you. In other words, you got to be able to trust people. You got to, you know, Deuteronomy 32:30 says 1 will put 1,000 to flight. 2 10,000. Ecclesiastes 4:9 says 2 is better than 1. Even Moses needed Aaron. Paul needed Silas. Michael Jordan needed Scottie Pippen. Batman needed Robin. You know what I'm saying? So when people start thinking that they can do it by themselves, I'm like, you know, even Tonto needed the Lone Ranger. I know I'm reaching way back. You know, and I try to even explain that to my dad, I can remember at one time his biggest attendance was around maybe 260 people. But when he died 4 years ago, his attendance was at 10 people. So when you start talking about the church is declining, it's because they have missed the shift.
And a lot of it is most Christians, the last statistic I heard was an average Christian goes to church 3 times in 8 weeks. But then now they're saying since COVID, 1 time in 6 weeks.
Yes.
I'm like, my
I
God,
believe it.
1 time. And these people come in shifts now.
Right.
We're even seeing it. Not really at my 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Those people are pretty steady.
Shout out to Legacy's 8:30.
Yeah, 8:30.
They're
They're there.
The real Christians.
We see the regular ones.
Yeah, we know.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Now, 11 o'clock, you like, you know, I'll be like, how many of you guys were here in last Sunday? And it's like, you know,
watched online.
Right, exactly. That's where we are. And it's interesting that you mentioned online. Probably 13 or 14 years ago, my wife had to have surgery. And 13, 14 years ago, my church was maybe 6, 7 years later. And so when I got home, because she missed 10 Sundays in a row, maybe 12. And when I got home, she said, baby, that was such a powerful word today. And I'm like, you weren't even there. You know, what are you talking about? And she said, honey, I had the online experience. I had my cup of coffee and I watched at the kitchen table and I love your 3 points. And I'm looking at her like, man, please, you know, because I was against online, but my staff at the time was like, we need to kind of pivot because this is what churches are doing now.
Wow.
And that's another way to touch people. And one of my staff said, listen, you know, you're always saying greater work shall we do. This is one of the ways that we're extending
use the words against you. Use your words against you.
And so I said, all right, go ahead and just do the online thing. And, you know, and then I started seeing that people were watching us in China and Australia and New Zealand and, you know, and all these other places.
This was before COVID.
This is before, I'm talking 2012, 2010. We were online. We were ahead of schedule. You know, because at that time I had a lot of black pastors. They were like, we're not turning that corner. And I was saying, I'm not either. But my staff kind of strong-armed me into doing it. And it worked. So when COVID happened.
How many of those pastors survived COVID?
Oh, man. A lot of them were looking for equipment during that time and couldn't find it. Because one of my employees, he said a lot of Church of God in Christ pastors were like, hey, where can we get some cameras? And he's like, they're gone. You know, so a lot of guys, a lot of those churches actually kept having church. You know, because we didn't have church for like a year during that time. You know, but nevertheless, I'm just grateful that, you know, we were already up and we were, you know, 21st century. And so, but again, learning, because one of my mentors for 12 years was Casey Tree. He's out of Seattle, Washington. And he's always been the one pouring into me.
We know the Treat. Why do I know that? I know that.
The Treats. They're 44 years in January. They've been at it for a long time. Yeah. So another mentor that always said, you need to get your online, you got to have cameras. And I'm like, to me, I want butts and seats, you know, but I had to pivot. Because it's interesting. When I started my church 19 years ago, I was the youngest on my staff. Now I'm the oldest.
Wow.
And I did that on purpose because I want young minds around me so I can continue to affect generations.
Okay. There goes another thing. I see typically with certain black churches, the staff is extremely old. The congregation is extremely old. The musicians are young, but once they play, they have another church that they really want to be at. Why you made a decision to staff younger than you? Why? What made you do that?
To keep me relevant. Because I'll be honest with you, I hate change. I hate change. But I understand 19 years later, in order to be relevant, I have to be open to change. And so I got all these young minds. Like I was going around the table. I got 23-year-olds, 26, 28. Like I'm looking at this 23-year-old and I'm looking at her like, when I started my church, you were 4. Now she's over my social media. Now she's telling me, I need you to do this more on your social media. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I'm looking at my children's pastor, 28. I'm looking at my somebody that's in my finance department, 22.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? I'm like, so it's just, you know, but I think
trust a 22-year-old with the money? They can barely drink.
But it's been a blessing having these young minds. You know, the Bible says David in Acts 13:36, it says that David, he served his generation by the will of God, and then he went to sleep. And so they said he served for about 40 years. And my goal, I want to do at least 30, you know, because when Kingdom is 30, I'll be 63.
Okay.
Wow.
And my son will be 43. And that's when I kind of want to back away. And because even now I'm probably mentor 27 pastors right now. So I want to kind of really shift more into that.
Wow.
I believe if I wanted to, I could probably do 40 years, but I don't want to be 73, still climbing behind a pulpit. I'd rather, you know, set my son up and get some fresh eyes in there with fresh ideas and whatnot.
Let me ask you this. I'm not even on social media like that this year, but I jumped on to check messages and all my stuff was all this stuff about Ty Tribbett said what and like all this. And so I watched the whole interview just to get context because I didn't want to just go off of clips.
Right.
And he had a similar background. He talked about he grew up in church, you know, black church. But then he said something that was, it made it kind of controversial. He said the institution of church is whack. And he said the systems and the structure of church today is whack. And later on, he kind of pivoted and tried to bring some more context to that statement. But as a pastor, how does that make you feel when you hear a very influential voice in Black Christian culture say that the church is whack?
It grieved my spirit. I didn't do like you. I didn't watch all of it. I probably watched maybe 2 or 3 minutes of it, but I watched enough to just be grieved in my spirit because Matthew chapter 16 talks about how the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Yeah. And then it talks about building the church. Build, that word build means to establish, to strengthen, and put back together. Yeah. I mean, Psalm 92:13 says, those that are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. David said in Psalm 122 verse 1, he said, I was glad when they said, let us go into the house of God. So I believe that the church should be a hospital. Yeah. Obviously, we're all imperfect. Yeah. But it's a place where you can come. I'm doing a series right now since we're in the month of March. Yeah. I'm doing a series called March Through It. Let's go. You know, we got to march through the depression, the setbacks, the betrayal. And so my job as a pastor is to give people hope. And that's what we do on Sunday mornings is give people hope. And for somebody to say that the church is whack. We had almost 800 new people join our church last year, which is pretty good. We normally do over 1,000 plus, but we're still trying to get our footing after this pandemic. And I believe this year we'll get there. We'll start hitting 1,000 plus new people, you know, because so many people are still moving to Arizona. And I believe, you know, people, when they come to church, one of the places are to a different city. A lot of times they're looking for a church. You know, but to answer your question, it was just disappointing because, you know, and I personally believe I could be wrong, but, you know, he stepped out, you know, he does he's the artist, of course, but he started the church, and right now I heard his church ain't doing that well. So maybe.
Well, he talked about he moved it all online because they had it. So, but what was crazy for me to hear that, and I love his music. My daughter loves his music.
Man,
like we went to the what was the tour called?
I've been to his concerts. I've even met him several times.
So what hurt me is we were with them last year at an event, and I saw a church give him over $1 million for his church.
Wow.
So what hurt me was it 2 million or $1 million?
I don't even know.
I don't want to misquote it. Somebody can Google it. Yeah. But I know over $1 million or $1 million plus was given to his church.
Right.
By a church.
So the church is whack.
Yeah. And that's what
you're saying.
And especially the platform that was said on the Breakfast Club, which is mostly unchurched or, you know, not, you know, that's not TBN. And it hurt me too as a pastor because I'm like, well, first, who hurt you, bro? Like, what happened?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And but I will say, I was thinking, what have you seen, even leading or growing up? I know, again, we're not saying the church is perfect. We're not saying that, you know,
because it's not.
You know, we're broken. We're leading. We're trying our best. But let's say, because as soon as he said that, everybody started chiming in and they were like agreeing and co-signing on that. And I was like, oh, crap.
Wow.
So now this is a narrative that is being shaped. And again, this is you know, most of my white friends aren't listening to the Breakfast Club. So let's even say this is a predominantly Black or minority-led driven audience.
Right.
How does the Black church change that narrative? Because it's out there. We're hurt by it. We don't agree with it because we look at the beauty of it. We look at how many hundreds of people are finding hope, finding Jesus, finding healing. Exactly. How many, you know, thousands of dollars are being given to organizations to help things. So I strongly disagree with the institution of the church because I'm in it and we're here. But we started a podcast called OverChurched because we're cognizant that there are people like Ty who feel that way. one of the last questions we'll give you, how does the Black church change that narrative? When you have one of your leading poster children saying that the institution of the church is whack,
Yeah.
and that it's, about money and butts and seats and all these things, how does the Black church change that narrative?
Back to him though, that I think
he said, give me a minute.
Yeah. I think he said that out of hurt.
Yeah.
I think, and I've heard from sources that his outcome with the pandemic didn't go as like he thought it would.
Yeah.
Like all of us.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
our attendance was down.
Yeah.
We came back one service and my staff is like, we need to stay at one, even though we hit 85%. I'm like, no, we're going to 2. I said, I'm going to believe God by faith that he's going to fill this thing up. Luke 14:23 says, go on the highways and the hedges and compel them that my house may be full. I believe if you got quality people around you, you will see quantity. And now we're full again at both services.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about going to a third. I'm like, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. I've done 5 at one time and I'm 52 now. I'm not 32 anymore. But I think that Ty was speaking out of his hurt. That's my personal opinion. And I think that, we kind of just got to let it just bounce off of us because I believe the church is turning a corner.
Yeah.
I believe the church, I talk to pastors probably every day.
Yeah.
And churches are, Bishop Jakes, I talked to him, I did a Zoom call with Bishop Jakes probably 3-4 years ago. And the advice he gave us as pastors, he said, listen, gentlemen, he said, we got to treat our church like a startup church. He said, because all of our attendants are down. Everybody's all about that. And he says, now we're all trying to get eyeballs because everybody was online. He said, but when we get back in our buildings, he said, we're going to have to treat our church like a startup. And he said, and then people are going to want the community again and human touch. He says, but we're going to really have to grind hard in order to get back our churches back to what they were. And I took that advice and I ran with it. And now here we are 3-4. And he said it was going to take about 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
And he was absolutely right. I thought it would have took maybe half of that time, but it's taken 3 to 4 years for people to get their footing and whatnot, But I think overall, the church is finally getting back in a good place where people are coming back to church. Because again, I talk to guys all over the nation, not just Black pastors, but all pastors. And these guys are, even their money's back up. Attendance is back up. People are joining the church.
That's amazing.
So I think that, again, he said that out of hurt. And so unfortunately, he's just doing online. I don't know his current situation, why he's not in person. And I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus, but we got a lot of these artists that are becoming pastors. You better make sure you got the grace on your life to do it. Because just because you can preach doesn't mean you can pastor. And just because, and I know guys that can pastor that can't preach. You know what I'm saying? But I do know a lot of guys that can preach but can't pastor. To me, pastoring is like yesterday. I got a couple, they're 87 years old. They've been married for over 60 something years. And I spent 30 minutes on the phone just encouraging him because he's got cancer. Where that phone call would have potentially been delegated out to one of my elders. But I felt like that was a call that I needed to make because I still have a shepherd's heart. I still love people. So I think we can't get caught up, and I think he was trying to appeal to that audience too. And then I think a lot of it had to do with his hurt as well. But overall, I think the church is really turning the corner. Overall,
including the Black church.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause again, I talked to all my friends, their churches are starting to finally grow again. They're adding services, finances are up again. So so 2024 has been a really good year, and 2023. Now 2022, 2021, everybody was still trying to get their footing, especially 2020. But 2023, 2024, I'm getting nothing but phenomenal calls from a lot of my guys. I don't have anybody calling me telling me they're going to quit the ministry.
Well, that's good.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing. It's a blessing. But thank you so much, Pastor Steele, for just giving us your insight. And I just love the legacy that you've had.
Bless you.
And that you're living right now.
You.
So that's beautiful. That's
you.
so beautiful. And God just bless you and grace you for that.
He has.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for what you've been doing.
Guys.
And for all cultures, all races.
Amen.
It's inspiring to see.
Thank you.
I do. Our prayer is that more minority-led churches will follow that path, learning methods, being intentional, keeping a heart of loving people. Because again, we're not saying every church 99% of churches are never going to see the amount of people you see, but that doesn't mean they can't be intentional with their methods and serve with excellence so that they can continue and have another 19 years.
Yeah. And I appreciate you all too blazing the trail. Because I'll be honest with you, I've always wondered who would come behind me and really be all things to all people. And I believe you guys are that couple.
Wow.
You know, that you're not just trying to have people sitting in front of you that look like you, but you're doing the 1 Corinthians 9:22, all things to all people. So kudos to you guys that you have a desire, you know, to be all things to all people, to touch all races and all ages. So you guys keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, make sure you go and love, live, and lead like Jesus. We'll see you next week.
Love y'all.